Hugs and kisses to all my friends out there. This is your host, ID Jester. Welcome to part 4 of our adventures in role playing. And what exactly is role playing and talking about it, trying to make people understand the basics and let them understand the concepts behind role playing. Last episode, we talked about the 3 pitfalls that you're going to have going into role playing and what things to avoid. This episode, we're going to talk about things you can do for yourself to make you a better role player. We have 8 different things to talk about here, so let's get right to it. Number 1, we talked about this throughout this series, is have a notebook and a pen available. Okay, get yourself a notebook and a pen and take notes. All right, just take notes. Don't want to spend all your time writing things down in your notebook. You want to be able to hear and listen to what's going on and stuff, but you want to take quick notes about things that are going on to make you better. If you're blinded, write down blinded. Uh, if you're uh, whatever the situation can, it happens to be. If you're encountering an NPC character, write the character's name down. His description, just quickly, he's an elf or male elf or female dwarf or whatever the situation may be. Write that information down real quick. So if you have to refer back to this character, you can look at your notes real quick and say, oh yes, I'm going to talk to Lady Dithalia and explain to her that I am not here to harm her whatsoever. Uh, DM says, that was a he. So make sure you take notes. Just write down basic information. You don't need to be spending your whole time writing things down. In fact, I would not recommend that you spend a lot of time writing things down. Just write down the basics of what you need to do. Some of you will remember everything and you won't need to write as many notes. Some of you uh, don't have as good memories, and you might need to write down a few, better notes. That's number 1. Number 2, this kind of goes along with that, and we talked about this in yesterday's episode. Write down on the top of the page in big bold letters anything you need to think about not to do from last episode. If you're terrible about staying in character, then at the top of your page, write down stay in character. If you're terrible about metagaming, write down don't metagame. Big bold letters so you can see that every time you look at your sheet, the first thing you should see is whatever that statement is. It keeps reminding yourself over and over and over again. Eventually, hopefully, you'll get to the point where you won't need to do that because you'll be so invested in your character and so invested in the story and what's going on that you'll be so much in character that you won't have to worry about not being in character or not, um, understanding the situation and the environment. And you don't have to worry about metagaming. So hopefully, eventually, you won't have to do that. But if you're new to role playing, you keep catching yourself saying things that you shouldn't be saying because you're metagaming or whatever, write down don't metagame at the top of your page. So hopefully every time you look at your sheet, hopefully it'll remind yourself, okay, I'm not metagaming. Don't use my knowledge for what my character would know. Number 3, and this is an important one, and I think it's going to help all new role players. Practice while you're at home. Talk to yourself about what you're doing. I'm now walking out to the mailbox. I stop and look both ways to make sure there's no cars coming. I sneakily cross the street, circle around from behind the mailbox, and flip open the lid quickly. Just say things like that to yourself during your everyday um, activities. Just do it about 5 or 6 times a day or more if you enjoy doing this stuff, and it really gets you in the practice of describing what you're doing, and you'll start to find that you're starting to expand your vocabulary and you're trying to use more terms, and it just gets you in the mood to say what you're doing. It's the same thing as what you're going to be doing in role playing. You're going to be telling the DM what your character is doing. So the more you practice at home, the more you can be proficient at the table. And, like I said, just practice at home 5 or 6, 10 times a day, whatever it takes. When you're not role playing that day and you're not going to your game session or you don't have an online session scheduled, just to keep yourself in the frame of mind. You can even, describe what you're doing in real life, but turn it as though you are in a fantasy world or a sci-fi world or whatever your character genre that you're playing in. If you're playing a 1920s murder mystery, then turn what you're doing in your real day life into what you're doing in your campaign or in your game. Uh, if you're in a fantasy world, instead of crossing the street to go get the mailbox, up ahead I see the door. I approach it stealthily. I listen to see if I hear anything on the other side. I slowly turn the handle and prop open the door just a little bit. Perfect. You're not going to get the mail, right? You're changing what you're doing. It might help you as well. But if you find yourself, not knowing what to say because you're trying to convert what you're doing in real life over to your campaign world, then just talk about what you're doing in real life. If you can find yourself able to take what you're doing in real life and convert it over into your sci-fi campaign or your Dungeons and Dragons campaign or whatever your situation is, that's even better because now you can get some of the terms. You're used to saying the same terminology that your character would say, the same, the same actions that the character would use and stuff like that. So just uh, practice while you're at home. Do it every day as much as you can. And I think it will definitely help you. So that's number 3. Number 4 kind of goes along with this. When you describe what you're saying, what you're doing, try to be as specific as possible so that everyone at the table knows and the DM knows exactly what you're doing. There's nothing worse than having a conflict at the table because you weren't specific enough about what you're doing. If you just say, "Oh, I walk over to the door," that really doesn't tell the DM exactly what you're doing. You walked over to the door. All you've talked about is going from point A to point B, but you haven't talked about anything else. Are you interacting with the door? Are you opening the door? Are you standing there just looking at the door straight in front of you? Is that what you're doing? I'm assuming that's what you're doing. You walked over to it and you're staring at the door because that's all you told the DM you're doing. So try to be as specific as you can. Use adverbs and adjectives. Yes, adverbs and adjectives to describe the scene that's going on. Instead of saying I open the door, say something like I thrust open the mighty door. Sounds a little bit more impressive. So use extra words. Try to get into describing what you're doing as best as you can and with as much detail as you can. And be specific as you can about everything. So you don't just walk over the wall. I walk over to the wall and I gingerly place my hands on the wall. Feel how cold it is. I feel my fingers rubbing the texture of the wall. It tells the DM, it tells all the players exactly what your character is doing. There's no question what your character is doing, right? Which could be a great thing because the DM can then continue on with the story. As you place your hands on the wall, as your fingers slide over the stone, one of your index fingers catches the edge of something that doesn't feel cold and stone. It feels like a metal object. Okay, so perfect example of how the DM and the players work together to create this story, but it's only because you're creating the scene, you're telling the DM exactly what you're doing. There is a caveat with this, though. You don't want to go on with a 15-minute dissertation about what your character's doing because no one wants to hear that. The DM doesn't want to hear it. The players don't want to sit there for 20 minutes listening to what you're saying. Be quick and thorough about it. You don't want to be going on and on and on and on and on, and the other players are like, oh my God, does this guy ever shut up? Be thorough, be interesting, be precise, and be specific, but don't carry on. Don't just add things to add things, okay? Tell the DM, tell the players, it shouldn't take you more than 10, 15 seconds. If you start getting into these 45-second to a minute montages about exactly what your character is thinking and exactly what they're doing, every once in a while these can, yes, be okay. But if you continually do it over and over and over again, the other players are going to go to the DM and say, "This guy needs to go because he's hogging all the story. You know, he's you know, I understand he's role playing. You need to talk to this guy and let him know. You know, he didn't need to tell us his life story every single time he does something. We appreciate, you know, the fact that he's role playing. We appreciate the fact that he's, you know, adding intrigue and story. But if you read any good fantasy novel, and I put my fantasy novel over there, so I can't hold it up for you guys, but um, you know, if you read any good fantasy novel, there's not like 3 pages of what a character says. Never will you ever see that. Normally, you only see one paragraph. You see a reply from another character. You might see another paragraph, maybe 2. It's never going to be 3 pages of what a character's saying. So just keep that in mind. You want to be as specific as you can. You want to be as detailed as you can, but you don't want to carry on and on and on because nobody wants to hear it. The main thing is because if it takes you a minute and a half to describe exactly what you're going to say, nobody's going to remember the first minute. All they're going to remember is the last 30 seconds. And then there's going to be some conflict. What did you, I said I walked over to the door and I examined it and I reached under, I reached under the crack and felt the air on the other side. I also tried to pick the lock. I also tried to knock on the door. I also, nobody's going to remember that. So just remember, just try to keep it as precise, but as detailed as it needs to be, but not extremely long for any reason whatsoever. So that's number 4. Number 5, try to involve your fellow players when you're describing what you're doing. Obviously, if I'm describing my character's actions, that's great. But then at the end of your statement, you can say things like, I laugh and I pat the elf on the shelf. The elf on the shelf. I pat the elf on the back, or after you get done describing what you're saying, you say, "What do you think about that, Master Dwarf? Do you agree with that?" Things like that. To keeps, because now we're going to have interaction between the characters. Again, interaction between the characters is just never a bad thing. Okay, there is a caveat to that as well. It is a bad thing when all they do is, I think we should go here. No, I think we should go here. No, I think we should go here. No, I think we should go here. We should camp on the north side. No, we should camp on the south side. We should go into the cave. No, we shouldn't go into the cave. That's bad things, right? If they're constantly just arguing back and forth or the players can't agree on what you're doing, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about involving the other players by, hey, you describe what your character's doing, and then at the end, ask another character, what do you think about this? Or what's your views on this situation? Or, I told you what, let's say, for example, I'm from the mountains and I'm used to the cold weather. We walk into a cold room. I describe how my character takes a deep breath, enjoying the cold. And then at the end of what my statement is, I then say, "Dwarf, aren't you used to the cold living in these mountains?" Stuff like that. Just try to involve your other characters as much as you can. Now, they might say, "Yes, I agree," or whatever. They might not be prepared for that, but sometimes you get some good, nice, productive bantering going back and forth. You don't have to include players every single solitary time. But let's say I'm playing in a group with 5 players and 1 dungeon master, right? And the dungeon master keeps asking me things. He keeps asking me things. He doesn't include the other players, or maybe the other players are not as engaged in the story because maybe I'm the spokesman for the group because I have the best skills, the best diplomacy, the best deception skills. So, excuse me, I normally do most of the talking for the group. The other players sit back and they listen to what's going on, and that's perfectly fine. And there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But when the DM's interacting with you all the other times, the other players can get bored because I'm not doing anything. My characters aren't doing anything. So if you find that situation and you're the player that's constantly being asked questions and you're talking back and forth, you want to involve the other players, you know. Okay, well, I have to talk with my friends here and find out if they're willing to take this job of, you know, Gundren, the dwarf. What do you think about this situation? Should we go into the troll's lair and try and slay this mighty beast, or do you think we can find a better offer somewhere else? Involve the other players that way. That's what I'm talking about. Keeping the other players part of the story, part of everything. I mean, like I said, if you're the spokesman for the party, or another player is the spokesman for the party, and they do a lot of the diplomacy and the talking with the NPCs and stuff, that's great. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Uh, but try to, if the other player includes you in the story, and you will include them. Maybe I'm the best fighter of the group. I can do the most damage. I can take the most hits and everything. And of course, we got the squishy mages in the back who can't do anything except for cast a spell every once in a while. Well, during combat, I'm really kind of the main focus, and I got this great, I'm doing all the attacks, I'm doing all this, and the other players, they're kind of stuck in the back because they don't do as good in combat. So I might include them when I'm doing my role playing in combat. Maybe I slice off the goblin's head with one of my attacks. I pick up the head and I toss it back to the mage and I say, "Here you go, mage. Do something with this." Just things like that is what we're talking about. So that's number 5, involving other characters in your statements. Hopefully you got a couple of the good examples we're talking about. Number 6, things you can do to help yourself role play better. What you want to do every once in a while, if you find you're losing your focus, you keep losing track that you're out of character and stuff like that. The best thing you can do is take your character sheet, right? Take your character sheet where all your information is, and turn it over. Turn it over. Just put it down, face down on the table. Close up if you've got rule books out in front of you, close them up, put them aside, put them away. Don't have anything in front of you. Take your dice, set them aside. You want to just nothing to distract your mind other than what you're thinking about. When I see my character sheet face up all the time, it's constantly reminding me of, oh, I got a 15 strength, I got a 12 intelligence, I can move 30 feet, my armor class is 17, my current hit points is 6 out of 112, whatever the situation may be. All these stats, all they're going to do is try and metagame you into doing actions that your character wouldn't do. Because as we talked about in yesterday's episode, if I know I can only move 20 feet and the door is 30 feet away, I'm not going to run to the door because I can't make it in one turn. And I'm still going to be in the same situation where the enemy can hit me, and I don't want that. And because you see your character sheet with all that, I can only move 25 feet because I'm a dwarf or a halfling or wherever the situation is. So turn your character sheet face down. Take the rule books, close them up, put them aside. Just put everything aside so that you don't have any of these other distractions. You're only focused on what you're thinking about. You're not looking at stats. You're not looking at numbers. You're just thinking about the situation. Play it as if you were that character. Play that situation just like you were that character. If I'm a dwarf, I'm running for the door. If I've got 6 hit points left, I'm running for the door. I got to get out of there. If I don't make it in one turn, so be it. Now, who knows? Maybe the dungeon master might say, because you are running for your life, you get to the door. Oh, wait a minute, I can only move 25 feet. It says here right on my character sheet. Everything, every rule book, everything part of a role-playing game is just used for the basic information for the dungeon master to include however he wants in the game. That's why there's so many homebrew rules and homebrew worlds and everything like that, because the dungeon master has full control over everything. He can make a goblin that has 2,000 hit points as a first level character or first level monster if that's what he wants to do. Dungeon master has full control over everything. So don't just assume, oh, I can only move 25 feet. You use what you want to do, and the dungeon master will tell you the outcome. My character sprints for the door. He is running for his life. I am so badly wounded. He sees blood spattering off him as he's running for his life. Now the dungeon master might say, fine, since you're running for your life, you get to the door and open it up, jump on the other side, and blockade it so the monster can't get you. Dungeon Master doesn't have to say that because according to the rules, you only move 25 feet. But if you are worried about your numbers, you're worried about your stats and everything, you're not going to play your character as you would play your character. You're going to worry about the numbers, you're going to worry about the stats, you're going to worry about the abilities. Turn your character sheet over, put the rule books aside. Take a deep breath and think, what would my character do? If I'm a dwarf and I'm severely injured, I'm going to try and get out of there. Everyone throughout history would do the same situation. You shouldn't change that fact because you know you can't make the door. And if you keep reminding yourself by seeing your character sheet or your stats, I can't pick this up. I don't have a high enough strength. I've got a 10 strength. There's no way I can pick this up. I can't. I'm not even going to tell the DM I'm going to pick it up because look, I got a 10. I got a freaking 10 strength right there. 10. That's what it says. 10 strength. I can't pick this up. There's no way. I'm not strong enough. Really? We hear stories all the time about someone that lifts a car up because it's crushing their son or their daughter, or some little lady has picked up a car because it was crushing her baby, or whatever the situation is. Doesn't mean that your DM is going to do that. There's no requirement for your dungeon master to do that, but you never know if you don't play your character the way you would play it. I am going to, this is crushing my friend. Everyone else is unconscious. It comes to me. What am I going to do? I'm going to try my best to try and lift this rock off my friend. It's crushing my friend. It's going to kill him. I'm going to try and lift it up. And if I can't do it, I can't do it, but I'm going to try and lift it up. And if you're too worried about looking at your strength number and your dexterity numbers and you're looking at the rules and everything like that, right, then you're not going to play your character the way you should play your character. So flip over your character sheet, close the rule books, put them aside, keep everything away other than what you would do as your character. And that's the most important thing, is playing your character. It might work out very badly for you. I'm running towards the door as fast as I can because I'm severely wounded. The dungeon master might say, will you make it about 15 feet because you're so wounded? That's as far as you can get. Now it's the monster's turn, and he walks up and stabs you in the back. Take 12 points of damage. Oh, I'm down. Poof. That's part of the game. You don't know what's going to happen. It's all based upon your actions and the dungeon master's actions to interact with one another. You tell the dungeon master what you do. He gives you the reply. He gives you the situation. Might end up very badly for whatever reason. But if you play your character, you play your character. You add to the story. So that's number 6. Close the rule book, turn over your character sheet, and worry about You and your character's story. That's what you should be involved with, not the rules and the rule books. Let the dungeon master figure out what's going on. You tell the dungeon master what you're doing, let the dungeon master do the rest of it. All right, number 7. Number, here we go. Number 7. I don't know. It looks backwards on my screen. Listen. Listen to what the dungeon master says. Especially the dungeon master. Listen to every word he says. Every time the dungeon master speaks, it's probably very important. Listen to what he has to say. Everything he's doing is involving giving you information, and if you're not listening to everything he says, shame on you. You got to be listening, because listening is the first step to comprehending what's going on in your current situation, understanding what's going on. Part 2 of this is listen to your fellow players. Listen to what they say. If a character says, oh, you just hear the wind come out of me and I buckle over and fall face down on the ground, everyone at the table, and the dungeon master included, knows he's unconscious laying on the ground. Right? You should know this because you've listened to the other players. So after 5 more rounds of combat that go by, if one of the character, after the battle's over, the character is revived up and he's like, nobody bothered to help my character. What's going on here? Well, I didn't know you were down. Well, how did you not know I was down? Were you not listening to what my character said when he got knocked out, or what? I didn't understand, whatever. Pay attention to what your fellow players and the dungeon master is saying so you understand the current situation. Very important to role playing, because you can't, it's going to break the immersion of the story of what you're doing if you're like, oh, I'm going to run over and I'm going to attack this creature with my sword. Dungeon master puts up his hands. Well, okay, you run over there, but the goblin's laying on the ground, cut in half by the fighter standing above him with the bloody sword we just talked about. So make sure, pay attention to what the dungeon master says. Like I said, every kind of the way he says certain things. If you're interacting with an NPC character, and the DM is using these big fancy words, and he's giving, this very extraordinary statement from the NPC character, you listen to what the character's saying, but also understand, well, this guy's using big words. He's probably well educated. He's got knowledge. He's not just some bumpkin bandit that lives in the wilderness by himself. Obviously, he's probably been educated. He's got some kind of a thorough knowledge. He speaks several languages. He's dressed nicely. The way the DM has told you all this information, to comprehend what's going on with this player. If I just start talking to this guy like he's a barbarian, hey, dude, you best leave here. It just doesn't make sense, because this NPC that we've run across is talking as if he's a wizardly scholar of renown and repute, and then obviously the barbarian's talking about you go this way, me no goes. You can kind of understand. The dungeon master doesn't need to say, well, this guy just seems like he's uneducated. He's kind of a wild land, a barbarian. He just doesn't have the civilized skills as such, and you can kind of understand that by listening how the DM describes things. So make sure, listen to your DM and your fellow players and hear what they have to say. Number 8, whichever way we go, I don't know. Read. Read, read, read. There are so many good authors out there for whatever genre you're interested in. that do a far better job of explaining role playing in their stories than I could do, because they're basically doing role playing for you. On all they're doing, instead of using words, is they're writing it down for you. If I was to dictate our role playing sessions and put them down on a piece of paper, I am doing nothing more than writing a fantasy novel. So I can highly, highly recommend you just read whatever genre we're talking about. I keep using fantasy because that's what I like the most, but if you're into Star Trek or Star Wars or whatever your genre is, you're into horror, you're into gangsters, or you're into medieval times, or if you're into futuristic times, or whatever it is, buy some books, read them, and specifically when you're reading the books, listen to how the characters talk. Listen, say that, when you're reading it, say them out loud. Say the words they say out loud. It would definitely help you. Again, the all a fantasy novel, and again, I put my book over on the shelf. I should have had it ready for me, but all a fantasy novel is a D&D adventure or a Star Wars adventure that someone dictates what happens and writes it all down in a piece on the piece of paper, puts it all together, and then goes to a publisher and says, publish this book for me. That's all a fantasy novel is basically a Dungeons and Dragons game that they dictated, or a Star Wars game that they dictated, or whatever, whatever your genre is. So a fantasy novel is a story, a fantasy story. While you're role playing, you are creating a story. You're doing the exact same thing. So if you read, you will see these fantasy. Uh, you will see how the characters interact in the story. You will listen to how they're doing things, how they talk, how they say things. And of course, one of my bad things is a lot of great authors out there. They have a lot better grasp of the language. They have so many more words that I wish I had. And when I'm reading fantasy novels, I get to a word, I'm like, wow, I don't even know what that word is. I look it up. I try to find out what it is. So, hopefully, if you're reading these novels, you're expanding your vocabulary. You can then do it when you're doing number 3, practice while at home. Start using some of these phrases that they use in the fantasy novels, and phrases that terms are using, and the way they talk. Might even give you a way to create an accent for your character, the way they talk, stuff like that. So 8 great things that you can do to think about while you're role playing to make yourself a better role player and make yourself part of that story. Hopefully this will help you guys. So thanks so much for watching part 4 of our role playing series. I do appreciate all the thoughts and comments, suggestions, and everything, all the views that you guys have done. And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Hugs and kisses. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.